All right, if you have your Bible, we're going to be in 2 John tonight. 2 John. We finished up 1 John last week, and then we'll look at 2 John, however far we get this week. I don't know, we may be able to do the whole thing, and then 3 John, and then we will move on. So let's begin by reading it. It's just one short chapter, just 13 verses. And then we'll offer some thoughts about the book as a whole, and then start looking at the text itself. As you'll see, it bears, great similarity to 1 John, and we'll talk about why that is. All right. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father, Son, in truth and love. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one that we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is the love, and this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is a deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Your translation may read there, what you have worked for, and we'll deal with that when we get there. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and to talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you. All right. So this is one of the few shorter books. So you got 2 John, 3 John, Jude, Philemon. And each of these books could have been written on one piece of papyrus or parchment. Probably this is written on papyrus because that's the word he uses at the end. I've got many things I want to say to you that I'd rather not say. Our translations say paper. The original is the word papyrus, of papyrus and ink. And so these shorter letters, especially 2nd and 3rd John, so when we get into this, when we think about, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John all bear great similarities, all dealing with the same situation. 1 John obviously is the treatment of the whole subject matter that he's kind of, I think we talked about this in the introduction to 1 John, he's kind of sent out as a circular letter to all the churches in Ephesus and that region about the teaching that is taking place and what the answer to it is and how they should respond, okay? 2 John and 3 John, it seems like he is sending it to two specific churches to address specific issues that they face, okay? So you can kind of think of it like this. So John writes 1 John, and then he has it copied. Probably in the local church, they would do that a lot. When they received letters, they would copy them, and then they would send them on to other churches. Colossians 4 and verse 6, or verse 16 talks about that. When you get the letter from Laodicea, or when you're done, send this letter to Laodicea and make sure that Laodicea sends you the letter that they have received. And so there was the circulation of apostolic writings, and that's basically how the Bible comes to be formed, is this constant circulation amongst the letters. So, now where was I going with that? Sorry, sickness has been in our house all week, and if I get mad at this, if I get sick at this point, I'm just going to be mad about it. But I can already feel that that's probably what's fixing to happen. But anyway, and so we're circulating these letters, and so most likely 1 John is written, produced in a couple different copies and then sent out to churches. And it would seem that with two specific churches, it's like John says, okay, before you send this letter, before we send a messenger with 1 John as we know it, to this congregation over here, I need to write a specific note to some of the people in that church about things that are going on, to give them like a specific instruction. As a matter of fact, some people have described it kind of like a cover letter. Or even an appendix. Okay, here's how you deal with your specific situation. And the situations are a little different. In 2 John, it would seem that he's concerned about their welcoming the individuals who we call the cessationists, the individuals who have left the faith of the church and of Christ. And so he's warning them in this letter not to do that. In 3 John, he's dealing with kind of a power war that's all contingent upon this. Diotrephes appears to be the individual who is kind of taking control, and he appears to be one of the individuals who's denying the divinity of Jesus and is exerting influence, and John is writing some instructions to an individual about how to handle that. So that's 2nd and 3rd John. Now, reconstructing the cultural and the church makeup is something that's a little bit of a challenge. Okay, so when we have churches now, obviously you're going to have, in most communities in the South, you're going to have multiple churches in a county, in a city, something along those lines. But we're a legalized religion. We're allowed to own land. We're allowed to construct a building. We're allowed to assemble. That was not so in the first century. They were able for a while to operate under. So Rome, you had to be on the list of approved religions in Rome. And you'll see this play out in Acts. And if you weren't on the list of approved religions, well, then you were considered a threat to the government and you weren't allowed to practice. Now, for the early years of the church, up until AD 70 and a little bit later, the church could fly under the radar because the Roman government saw the church as another wing of the Jewish faith. And so they kind of allowed them to exist because they considered them to be Jewish in faith. Well, now when John is writing, that is not the case anymore. And they are not on the list of approved religions. And by the way, that's not something that just happened then. That's something that happens all over the world even today. In Vietnam, that happens. The church is not on an approved list. And that's why when Dr. Barrier and Travis Harmon were over in Vietnam this last year, the police interrupted and shut down a meeting because they did not have their papers to be legalized to practice religion. Okay? So, with that in mind, we have to think very differently about how churches were composed back then. The idea of having a church that was 150, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 people in one location is that's not the way it worked. Okay? You would many times, because they're house churches, you don't get to own church buildings, you don't get the right to have church buildings until about the 4th century with Constantine. Okay? So before then, you had to meet in homes. And the way their homes were constructed, they had would many times have an open courtyard, usually one would serve kind of as what was called a patron of the church. And he or she would volunteer their home to be used. And many times when you're looking at the ends of these letters, and Paul in particular is thanking this person and talking about the church that is in their home, well, the individual who owns that home is kind of the patron of the church, because the Mediterranean world was a patronage society. And we'll talk more about what that means a little bit later, I think. But so anyway, you've got the patron, and he or she, they have their home, and so the churches are there. Well, if you look at some of in one of my classes in school recently, a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at archaeological remains of certain cities. And in these cities, you can find the remnants of homes in the 1st century. And so we can kind of look at the courtyards and measure them and see how big they are, how could they facilitate, how many could they facilitate, because their homes were laid out. All the homes were connected. And many times, I mean, it's kind of peculiar, and it's really hard to explain without having a picture. Hindsight, I realize I probably should have had a picture. But anyway, so you can only fit so many. Well, what do? Well, if you're in a big city like Ephesus, I mean, you could have as many as 30 or 40 house churches. Usually they did kind of, what we do. Why do, especially when you go out into the country in the South, in Kentucky, we had tons of smaller churches out in the country, and sometimes only like 3 miles apart. And people say, why is that? Well, you have to remember, those churches were established in a day when you rode a horse to church. Okay? So you had to have them in every little community. And it's not a sign that the church is dying because some of those smaller churches are closing. It's a sign, actually, that we're unifying, because now we have modern forms of transportation and we don't need that many. Okay? And so some people like to misinterpret and make a big scare scene out of the data. Well, you have to use the data with a level head. Okay? You have to think a little bit. Anybody can take numbers and manipulate them and make it look like something. So anyway, you've got these churches spread all over, and that's just in one city. And then you go into another city. The 7 churches of Asia may have been involved. They're addressed in Revelation 2 and 3, and they may have been involved in receiving this letter. Because when you look at the 7 churches of Asia in Revelation 1 and 2 and 3, it follows a circular mail route. Okay? So in essence, John could have copies of the Revelation made and then hand them off to messengers, or to one particular messenger, and that messenger would then travel from Ephesus and then up and up and up and up and down and down and down and then right back in Ephesus. It's a circular mail route is what it was, a well-known circular mail route. So they're circulating this letter, and how many copies of it, who knows. But 2nd and 3rd John stand out because they're 2 particular churches where it seems like he's writing specifically to them and handing them information individually specific for their situations. Okay? Which is, that's an important principle to begin with when we're dealing with churches. No 2 churches are the same. Okay? No 2 churches are the same. And what happens a lot of times is people want to make churches in the image of other churches. You can't do that. Your churches are composed of different people with different giftings, with all different types of things. You have to operate with the church as it is. And so, I'm not one that's just big on programs that says, look, this church does this. It'll help us grow. Pardon me if maybe I'm just being cynical because I'm tired, but I don't see that. Okay? That may work there, that's great, but their community may be different. Their members may be different. And so I think what we're seeing in John with these letters is saying, hey, look, in specific places, you got to address specific things, and it's going to be peculiar. It's going to be different, and it's not a one-size-fits-all type approach to some of these things. So, all right. With that in mind, then, the basic information is not really all that different. Obviously, I think, now you can read people who will say differently, but I think the Apostle John wrote it. When you read the book, it reads just like 1 John. The vocabulary, the cadence, the rhythm, the subject matter, the words, they're all similar. Now, John, you remember in 1 John, it's an anonymous letter. It does not begin with any type of introduction or greeting. He just launches right into it. Second John is different. It has a greeting, and it reads more of what we would consider to be something like from Paul. So it says, "The elder to the elect lady and her children whom I love in the truth, grace, mercy, and peace will be with us." That sounds a little bit more like how Paul would begin a letter. And so this has more of the letter form, which is really not surprising, because if First John is a circular letter, it's just a massive letter that's going to be massively mailed out. You're not going to expect it to have a peculiar greeting to an individual saying who it is. And so there's that. Now, in this context, he refers to himself as the elder. And there are many reasons for that. And as we look at verse 1, we'll look at it. But I believe the elder is a reference to John himself. Okay? Then when we think, and that's an early church belief too. Irenaeus, who is an early church father, in his book, his writings Against Heresies, I know it's a bestseller, everybody's read it. Book 3, 16, chapter 16, verses 5 and 8, he discusses the authorship and claims that it's John the Apostle. Where is it written? It's written in Ephesus most likely because, again, when we look at writings of early church fathers, the universal consensus is that John spent his last years in Ephesus, and that's when the Jewish wars started. So the Jewish wars between Rome and Israel started in about 66, and then 70, Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed, and I think they go on to about 72 or 74 when they finally destroy and put down every part of the rebellion. And so the theory is, and where the evidence seems to lead, is that when the Jewish wars started, that's when John took Mary, the mother of Jesus. Remember, she's given to his care in John 19, that he took her and they went to Ephesus. And Ephesus became the center of basically Christianity at that point. So seemed like there was something else I wanted to say, but apparently wasn't too important. So most likely from Ephesus. All right. The period in which it's written, it's probably written in the 90s, just because it seems as if most of John's writings, all of his writings, whether it's the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, or Revelation, are written in the 90s. Revelation itself, in particular, there are a lot of theories, obviously, as with everything with Revelation, when it was written, but if you want to know the right answer, it's the 90s, okay? I'll just put it out there. It's the 90s, and it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that the emperor under discussion is Domitian, the idea of a reincarnate Nero, and a lot of that attached to 666, and what that's called is gematria, which is where letters have numerical value, and you add them up and you get a name. And there are even variations, because some manuscripts read not 666 but 616, and so if you do it in Hebrew and in Latin, you get the same individual. So I mean, it's pretty clear. And I realize I sped through that very quickly. I was just saying that to say I'm not just throwing that out there. There's legitimate reason for believing that. And so all of these things are coming from John as his life is coming to a close. And so 2 John seems to follow that pattern. Now, in this particular context, what is he doing? Well, in the heart of the letter, which is contained in verses 4 through 11, there are two particular things. He's encouraging them to continue in truth and love, which again is the theme from 1 John. But he's also talking to them and exhorting them about how to handle situations when a preacher comes into town and they're not confessing what they should about Jesus. How do you handle that responsibility? And so that's what he's going to help them understand. And I will tell you right now, a casual reading with modern eyes of 2 John will lead you to some conclusions that are not correct. Okay? Because we're dealing with hospitality. What does it mean to welcome a person into your house? What does it mean to give them a greeting? Well, if I just read that as an American, I can botch that pretty badly. Because, I mean, surely we know customs, just think about America. Customs in America. Think about just in this town. Customs are different. When I come to your house, do I take my shoes off when I come in or not? Now, see, some people don't care. Some people very much care. Can I put my elbows on the table or not? I do, sorry. I mean, some of that stuff is etiquette. It's pulled out of thin air. It's just made up. That's okay, though. I mean, if that's your rule, if that's important to you, then I'll do it. I'll keep my elbows off your table. But you see what I'm saying? Like, we have different notions of this. You want to come to the house and eat? Sure. Well, that doesn't mean you were going to sit down and have a big formal meal at our dining room table, the formal dining room. Matter of fact, I don't even want a formal dining room. Doesn't make any sense to me, right? So our customs are different. Okay? Think about how different they are in different parts of the world. So a guy I know who preaches in Florence, he was a missionary in Tanzania for 3 or 4 years. Now, if I go and I extend my right hand to shake someone's hand in Tanzania, they're going to take that as an insult. They don't have toilet paper. The right hand is not used. The right hand has a specific purpose. And if you extend that hand, you're euphemistically saying something to them. So when we're reading things in Scripture, especially something like 2nd and 3rd John, and we're talking about, what is this about not welcoming into your house? Is he saying, like, you can't cross the threshold? I can't give you a bottle of water because it's 800 degrees outside because you don't agree with me theologically? Or is he saying something very different? See, that's the key. And the reason why I emphasize that is because a lot of people take this text and they run too far with it. They go too far with it. So, let's start looking at the text itself, beginning with the greeting. So the elder to the elect lady and her children. So the elder, the term itself is presbyteros. It's one, most people are thrown by this because many times we have talked about, and rightly so in the church, that there are 3 particular Greek terms in the New Testament used to describe elders that oversee a local church. And we get 6 English titles from those 3 names, and one of them is presbyteros. Okay? But here's the thing. I mean, context determines usage. Right? Simple. I would hope that there's a fundamental difference. If you heard me say I loved Brooke, and this is the greatest time of the year right now. Think about it. From now until the end of Easter, we're going to have specialized wreaths the whole time. We're going to be in pumpkins, and then we're going to be in Christmas trees, and then we're going to be in, hearts, and then we'll be in eggs, which is like the penultimate of them. And it's just a great thing. But yeah, I've thought this through, and I have a thinking and a theory behind all of why they're superior. But anyway, hopefully you can see there's a difference in the way I use same word, but the context in which I use it, with which I associate it, determines how it is, what it means, and what I mean by it. Okay? And so when the individual here is saying, which I believe to be John, is saying the elder, I mean, he might be describing himself serving in what we would call the office of an elder, but I don't think so. He could be. Peter served as both. Peter was an apostle, and he was also an elder, 1 Peter chapter 5. But I think what he has in mind is something more like Paul when you look at the book of Philemon in chapter 9, when he describes himself as Paul the aged. Well, it's the same term, presbyteros. It just means he's an older man. The idea behind elders is that they are supposed to be older men. Now, how do you determine and interpret all that? Well, that's a whole different thing. But the notion is they are to be older, more experienced men as opposed to being a novice or a newly planted individual. And so John, most likely, at this time, I mean, he's well outlived his lifespan of about 45 or 50, which was the Mediterranean world lifespan. And so he's probably 80s, pushing 90 at this point. Probably born at the beginning of the first century in those early times, somewhere around the time of Jesus. So obviously when he writes as the elder, he's an older man at the time, okay? And then it says the elder to the elect lady. Now there are a number of different theories. I'm just going to go straight to what I think he's talking about. The elect lady, I think, has reference to a specific church that he's addressing, okay? Elect, all throughout Scripture, the church is considered to be the elect and the chosen people of God. And the elect lady, the church is also seen in the feminine. The church is the bride of Christ, Ephesians 5. Or in 1 Peter 5 and verse 13, Peter says, those who are in Babylon greet you. And he uses the feminine to describe all of that. Okay? So the elect lady seems to be churches. I mean, even I've heard in Southern American churches, where someone might say, for an example, New Antioch is having whatever, Friends and Family Day. They might say something like, that's our sister church, or our sister congregation is having this event. It's just a common term of expression. And the reason why I think it's more of a specific congregation versus just the church in general, if you look at verse 13, it says, the children of your elect sister greet you. And so the children would be members, so you would have individual congregations. If it's the church as a whole, then how do you have an elect sister who greets you? So it seems to make the most sense to say we're dealing with one specific church, and with what's going on there. I've still got like 4 minutes according to that clock. So he says, to the elect lady, talking about the congregation as a whole and her children, which would be members, okay, whom I love in truth. And not only I, but also all who know truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Okay? Whom I love in truth. Not only I, but also all who know truth. Not just me, John, but also all people who love truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. And so when we're dealing with the concept of truth, in this particular context, the concept of the truth of who Jesus is and staying in that fellowship of individuals who confess who Jesus is, there is a love that exists amongst people, and it's all of what 1 John has been about. There has to be a love that exists amongst people who love Jesus. If you say you love Jesus, you have to love other people who love him too. You have to love his other children. And you can even have a special relationship and a love that exists with people you do not even know. So, with the advent, well, when COVID kind of restricted things and everything went digital, and we had always kind of had streaming in the church, or we'd had it for probably 25 years where we could stream and do things, but it wasn't really taken advantage of the way it is now. So now, a lot of times when people travel, they will just watch a service from their local church. And I'm not commenting on that one way or the other at this point. I would say this, though. There is a great blessing of going and meeting Christians in other places that you do not know. First of all, you're a stranger in a city, but when you step foot in that church, there is a sense of welcome and of peace that comes with stepping foot into people's lives that you don't even know, but you know they believe and see things exactly the way that you see them. As a kid, it was important for me to go and visit other churches because it taught me, so when we would go on vacation or Daddy would go preach somewhere else or something along those lines, it taught me that what I believed was not just what one small group of people believed in this location. It showed me that this belief was held by people that I had no idea who they were, didn't even know they existed, that we held a universal belief system and that the family of God was much bigger. And that's one of the things that he's getting at here, to understand that. I love getting to travel. This last year I cut it out a whole lot, but I love getting to travel because you're flying into an airport, to a place you've never been, and somebody's going to pick you up at the airport and take you to the church building, let you stay in their home, and they've never met you and you've never met them. People say, no, I wouldn't do that. And you would rob yourself of one of the greatest blessings of your life. You would rob yourself of one of the greatest blessings of your life. Of getting to know people. And literally having friends, not in the Facebook sense, but legitimate, real friends all over the world. And that's one of the things we're seeing here. What do you have? You got him addressing the elect lady, and what is John also saying? Oh, and you've got a sister over here, this church over here, this other congregation over here. Oh, wait, you know each other. You like each other. You believe the same things. You also have an interest in each other. It's not a war. It's not a competition. We're on the same team. And we're going to try and work together. So we will pick up there hopefully next week, and then we'll certainly finish it out and move into 3 John.